to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis. Only on 101.3 Jams.
Okay, family, we're back. You're listening to In My Humble Opinion on 101 Jams. And as promised before the break, we have Dr. Umar Johnson on the line.
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
All right. So I'm sure you are well informed as to what's happening in the city of Charlottesville, the KKK and neo-Nazis and anti-Semitics that have brought evil to our town, as well as what's happening on a national level as far as how our president has responded to that and others. I just want to know what's on your mind, my brother.
Well, a couple points immediately jumped out to me when looking at the things that have transpired in Charlottesville. Number one, I thought it was very interesting that most of the counter-protesters were white people. Clearly, Black Lives Matter was represented. There was a lot of black folk, but the white counter-protesters clearly predominated within the audience. And for me, I saw that as a deliberate attempt to once again make sure that the narrative, the social narrative that comes out of this is one that, again, eclipses, marginalizes, and dismisses the centrality of the black agenda as it relates to the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue. In other words, what we find, and we've been seeing this consistently since Dr. King's assassination, whenever there is a black protest to put forward an aspect of the black agenda, it is often blitzed by an overwhelming amount of white participation, which redirects the argument. That counter-protest was about slavery. That counter-protest was about sending a message that Robert E. Lee's statue should not be up there because it is disrespectful to African people given our legacy in this country. But because it was inundated with the homosexual white movement, and because it was inundated with the feminist white movement, and because it was inundated with the anti-Semitic Jewish white movement, the fact that this was about black people got obscured. I also thought it was rather interesting that the police, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, the police were told to stand down. And I thought it was rather ironic how the police allowed so much mayhem to go on during this protest, where compared to protests that were carried on by black people as a consequence of police genocide, you saw way more strong army from the police than you saw in Charlottesville. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were policing their own white people and not black people.
So Dr. Umar, Charles, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it. So let me ask you to that first point that you made. What benefit do you see in contrast to the downside of it being a community counter protest for our white citizens to say, we don't agree with the statue or preserving the Confederacy either, so we want to be out here with you. And and being that the population, the demographic does give a majority to our white civilians, that could be one reason for that. But I'm just curious do you see a benefit in the whole community being out there in protest?
No, I don't. Because what happens is whenever white people get involved in any type of a serious black undertaking directed at putting a microscope on the needs of black people, it automatically changes the narrative. Number one, it weakens the strength of the unapologetically African front. It weakens our ability to speak firmly about racism when you have white people advocating with you. In other words, in my premise, all white people are racist. All white people are racist. And all white people benefit from racism, and all white people practice it consciously, unconsciously, directly, and indirectly. So that is to say that whenever it's time for us to fight for anything that is a benefit to us, we need to do it by ourselves. Whenever we allow other people to get involved in a black struggle, it weakens the narrative and it redirects the conversation.
But Dr.
And I think one of the reasons why the police were told to stand down is because they wanted this to be violent, white on white, so that it allows for a platform to be re-energized so that the feminist movement, the LGBT movement, and the anti-Semitic movement can now resurge themselves into the talk around social issues in America.
Now,
I think this is very much set up.
Now, Dr. Umar, what some people would argue is they're in a damn if you do, damn if you don't situation. Because, as you mentioned, the majority of the counter protesters were white. So if the white counter protesters weren't there, then where does that leave the few, we were there, but the few African Americans that were there? Would we have even had that counter protest at all? And so some white people may argue that if I speak out for you, you got a problem. If I sit back and say nothing, you got a problem. What do I do?
Well, for me, in my position on that is I would want white people to be very clear that I never want them involved in black issues, because you can't show anywhere in our 398-year history in the United States of America where white participation in a black struggle has ultimately benefited that struggle. There's no evidence of that, so I wouldn't want them involved at all. And it has nothing to do with a hatred, but it has to do with making sure we stay focused on this as a black agenda. And let us be clear, those white folk were not out there to defend black people. Those white people were not out there to march for black people. They were not even out there to protest the statue. They were out there to challenge alternative right movement as it relates to their own agenda. For example, the alternative right movement is clearly a sexist movement. Okay, so from a feminist perspective, white women will have an issue with them. They are clearly anti-Semitic. So from a Jewish perspective, European Jews are going to have an issue with them. They are clearly against LGBT. So the LGBT community are clearly going to have issues with them. I would argue that most of the white people out there were not there in solidarity with black folks.
Okay.
They're out there advocating their own issues that are at odds with the alt-right.
All right. Again, family, you're tuned into In My Humble Opinion on 101 Jams, who are speaking with Dr. Umar Johnson. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
101 Jams is a non-profit community radio station. It is our mission to educate, inform, and entertain our listeners with local and national news and events while providing you the best of classic and new hip-hop and R&B. The views expressed on 101 Jams belong to those expressing them and do not reflect the views or beliefs of 101 Jams, the board of directors, or its parent company, Air Mix Virginia. To find out more about how 101 Jams serves your community, visit our website, 101jamz.com, or facebook.com/101 Jams.
For real, 101.3 got the city on lock. And when you're out of the city, listen online at 101jamz.com.
Family, we're back. You're tuned into In My Humble Opinion on 101 Jams. And before the break, we were speaking with Dr. Umar Johnson. Dr. Johnson, give us some guidance. Where do we go from here? How do we make this better?
Well, number one, I think there needs to be an intellectual paradigm shift as it relates to the black struggle in America. We'll be celebrating 400 years in just 2 years. From 1619 to 2019, that's 400 years. And I think there's certain ways we have approached our issues that are now dysfunctional and outdated. One of the narratives that has to shift, one of the paradigm shifts we have to take, is away from symbols to substance. To give you an example, when that white man walked into the church in South Carolina, Charlottesville, and murdered those brothers and sisters, one of the things that the state government of South Carolina was able to effectively do was shift the narrative away from social justice, political justice, economic justice, and they reduced the entire aftermath of the Charleston Nine to simply taking down, the Confederate flag from the State House. Look at this situation in Charleston, Virginia. I can see the local government and the state government attempting to do the same thing. We're going to take this statue down and give black people a symbol of advancement. Barack Obama, his two-term presidency, a symbol of advancement. And we have been a sucker for symbols of advancement, and we have to move towards substantive change. We need to see substantive change, not just symbols, because when people can take symbols, tokenism becomes the primary strategy that the power structure is going to use to give black people the illusion of inclusion. So what we need to be working for is systematic change in discrimination, systematic elimination of bias, systematic elimination of disproportionality, systematic elimination of discrimination. We need to be looking at how the systems can change the better serve black folk.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one system would be our access to capital, our access to organized wealth in large amounts so that we can rebuild the infrastructure of our community. If it's one thing that keeps Black America where Black America is, excluding our celebrity, because most of them will not even be allowed to help us the way in which we need to help, we need to be able to access capital. And that is the one thing we can't access. It is the one thing that everyone else can access. And that's why they can come into our communities and do better than we can, although we've been here 400 years. They have only been here 4 years, and they can build infrastructure better than us because they have that access. It's the economic racism, I would argue, is at the basis of all of the discrimination we face.
Okay. Okay. Aaron?
Yeah, Dr. Umar, pleasure to speak with you. I know you're familiar with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and before the ancestor passed away, she accurately, and I think I heard you speak about this, predicted that a lot of this quote unquote racist, white nationalist rhetoric would continue, and that they would start to respond with direct violence. Being a father with two young black African American boys, what everyday strategies do you have simply, and I like to ask all of our spokespeople strategies for us to stay safe in this kind of environment, because I also see that they're going to have another event at Texas A&M University, and they're going to continue to be doing these rallies. So what just everyday strategies of self-respect or suggestions do you have for black people and citizens to keep themselves safe as these individuals express this behavior and with direct violence?
Doctor, you with us?
Did you make out that comment if someone could paraphrase it for me?
Paraphrase it.
Yeah. So Aaron was asking, what tips would you give for us, particularly us with black kids facing these kind of adversities, ways to maintain our self-respect, but and also protect ourselves.
Well, one thing that has to happen is we have to give our youth, the next generation, we have to give them a very thorough political education. Because one of the things that I see missing from all of the protests that we have been having over the past several years, beginning with Trayvon Martin, coming up to even now with Charlottesville, Virginia, is a lack of political education for everyone, but particularly for the masses. And the reason why that's so critical, when people are not politically educated, they don't even know what they're fighting for. They know what they're fighting against. Black people have always knew what they were fighting against, but we weren't always crystal clear on what we were fighting for. So political education saves lives, a political education saves resources, and a political education saves time. So we have to politically educate the youth. But in order to do that, I think that adult Black America has to come together, and we have to decide on the platform that we want moving forward. You still have the ideological civil war in Black America. And that ideological civil war basically says there are some of us who are assimilationists, integrationists, and accommodationists. We believe the future for Black America is in getting white people to accept us. After 400 years, that is still a very popular ideology. And then you have the nationalist camp, which I represent, which says, listen, we don't have to hate white people, but we need to understand something. Every group in America that does well for itself does well by itself. So there has to be some degree of independent political, independent economic, and independent sociological building and infrastructure development within the Black community. So we're going to have to rectify that intellectual ideological civil war that still exists well after W.E.B. Du Bois versus Marcus Garvey, well after Dr. King versus Malcolm X, well after Frederick Douglass versus Martin Delany. We still need to rectify that because our children don't really know which way to go. Should I be an integrationist? Is that the way to go? Or should I push forward towards national?
All right. All right. Dr. Johnson, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Anytime. Y'all have a great day.
You too. All right, family. You're tuned in to In My Humble Opinion on 101 Jams. We're going to take another break and speak to Don coming up, right?
Don Gath.
There we go. All right. We'll be right back.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion.